Chapter 1. Back where it began. Maren James hadn't driven this road in over a decade. And yet, the moment her tires touched the winding path into Willow Creek, something inside her lungs deflated, not with fear, but with memory. Tall oaks arched over the narrow road like sentinels of her childhood. The air was crisper than she remembered, filled with pine, soil, and the faint sweetness of honeysuckle clinging to the late summer heat. She rolled the window down and let the wind kiss her face. Just 2 weeks, she reminded herself aloud. Fix the cottage, finalize the listing, and get back to your life. Her voice sounded hollow even to her. As she crossed the small bridge leading into town, the welcome sign came into view, still hand-painted, still chipped at the corners. Welcome to Willow Creek, a place to come home to. She scoffed softly. Easy to say when you never left. But she couldn't deny it. Something tugged at her heart. A quiet unease, or was it longing? The cottage came into view, nestled at the end of Fern Hollow Lane. Aunt Lila's place had always looked like something out of a storybook. Ivy climbing the stone chimney, faded shutters in a shade of soft green, and a front porch swing that still creaked when the breeze caught it. It was smaller than she remembered. The yard was overgrown, the flower beds wild and untamed. But it stood, just like always, patient and welcoming, like it had been waiting for her. She parked the car, stepped out, and immediately sank her heels into the soft, uneven earth. This was where she'd spent every childhood summer, where she'd caught lightning bugs in jars and watched thunderstorms from the porch wrapped in patchwork quilts, where she had kissed Silas Taylor for the first time and walked away from him the last time. She shook the thought off. Focus, Maren. You're not that girl anymore. Inside, the house was stale with disuse but filled with gentle echoes. A few cobwebs, dust, but everything was exactly where her aunt had left it. Framed cross-stitch quotes, stacks of gardening books, the old record player in the corner. Her chest ached as she stood in the center of the living room. Aunt Lila had been more than family. She had been the one constant in Maren's chaotic life, the soft place she could fall into, the woman who had written encouraging letters long into Maren's college years, even after the family drifted apart. And now she was gone. Her passing had been quiet, peaceful, according to the lawyer. No hospital, just a final breath on a Sunday morning, the Bible open on her lap, coffee half-sipped beside her. Maren had received the call 2 days later. And now here she was. Home. Only, she didn't know if she belonged here anymore. She spent the afternoon pulling dust covers off furniture and cracking open windows. It felt good to sweat a little, to move, to take control of something, anything. But by late evening, she realized she'd forgotten 2 important things: groceries and tools. The faucet in the kitchen was leaking. The back door stuck halfway closed, and the porch railing looked one strong gust away from collapse. She sighed, grabbed her keys, and headed into town. The hardware store hadn't changed. Still narrow aisles. Still old tin signs hanging above the sections. Still the faint smell of lumber and oil and something unnameably nostalgic. She grabbed a basket and began filling it with what she could remember needing. WD-40, a screwdriver set, sandpaper, wood glue. Couldn't stay away, huh? The voice hit her like a gust of wind through the soul. Low. Familiar. Warm and firm, like autumn hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She turned slowly. Silas Taylor stood just beyond aisle 3, taller than she remembered, broad-shouldered, wearing a faded green shirt dusted with sawdust. His eyes, those same deep, clear gray ones, were steady, curious, unreadable. Silas, she breathed. Maren. He said her name like it was both a question and a fact. There was a silence that pressed between them, not awkward, but thick with all the things they hadn't said in over 10 years. He nodded toward her basket. Doing a little home improvement? Trying. The cottage is holding together, barely. I was the last one to fix the porch, back when Lila was still up and down those stairs every day, he said, walking closer. Didn't expect to see you back. I didn't expect to be back. Another pause. You look well, he said, voice soft. She glanced down at her dusty jeans and wrinkled t-shirt. I don't feel it. His eyes crinkled in a small, knowing smile. Still bite your bottom lip when you're thinking too hard. She flushed, caught mid-bite, and stopped. He chuckled, a low sound that settled somewhere beneath her ribs. Still notice everything, huh? She said, trying to sound casual. Just the important things. Another beat. I should go. she said too quickly, tightening her grip on the basket. Got a lot to do. He nodded once. You know where to find me if you need a hand. And just like that, he turned and walked away. She watched him go. The familiar way he ran a hand through his hair, the slight limp in his right leg, the one he got falling from the creek swing the summer they turned 16. Everything in her tightened. How had one moment with him shaken her more than the last 10 years of city life? That night, back at the cottage, she stood on the porch with a cup of tea and let the breeze tangle through her hair. The willow tree in the backyard swayed gently, the same one she used to sit beneath as a girl, the one she and Silas had carved their initials into before she left. She couldn't see the carving anymore. Maybe time had healed the bark. Maybe it hadn't. But either way, something was beginning to stir in her, a whisper of a story not yet finished. Not a scream, not a calling, just a quiet beginning. Chapter 2. The Man Who Stayed. The morning sun poured through the sheer curtains of the cottage, dancing in patches on the hardwood floor. Maren sat on the edge of the bed, sipping lukewarm coffee from an old, chipped mug. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, another message from her design firm in Boston. She didn't open it. Not yet. The truth was, the longer she stayed in Willow Creek, the more muted her old life felt. The schedules, the pressure, the clients with endless demands and no patience. It was like the volume had been turned down on the woman she'd worked so hard to become. But that woman had built a name for herself. She had clients waiting, expectations, deadlines. Still, her fingers hesitated over the screen. Instead, she opened the front door. She walked the 2 blocks to town, taking it all in like it was the first time. The streets were quiet. The shops familiar. The world felt softer here, slower, like it hadn't been rushed into the future the way everything else had. The old bookstore was still running, now with a new hand-painted sign that read whispers in pages. The diner across the street had the same chalkboard menu out front, with Tuesday, buttermilk pancakes plus free coffee refills scribbled in pink. She stopped. There, across the street, was Taylor's workshop. New sign. Same building. The last time she'd seen Silas in that space, he was 17 and helping his father rebuild the roof before the storm season rolled in. Now the shop looked his. Aged wood sign. Wide open doors. Tools lined with precision. Maren crossed the street before she could talk herself out of it. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside. The place smelled of cedar and sawdust. Peaceful. Honest. Silas looked up from behind the workbench, safety goggles perched on his head, a pencil tucked behind one ear. You came, he said, setting down a small hand plane. I needed wood filler, she said. And maybe guidance. A corner of his mouth curved. Always happy to provide both. He reached for a cloth and wiped his hands. Let me guess, porch railing? Among other things, she said. The place is hanging on by sheer will. It has more than that, he said gently. It has bones. Heart. She glanced around at the organized chaos of the workshop. You've built a lot since I left. Had to, he replied. Dad passed 5 years ago. Left me the business. Figured it was better than chasing something else. So you stayed. He nodded, unashamed. I stayed. She nodded slowly. Most people I know are running from where they grew up. You ran toward it. Maybe. Or maybe I just knew this place had more in it than people gave it credit for. The words hit somewhere deep. He wasn't talking about the town. Not entirely. They spent the next 30 minutes walking the aisles as he explained what tools she actually needed, and which ones the internet had probably told her were essential when they weren't. He grabbed her a reliable cordless drill and a can of the same wood stain he'd once used on her aunt's porch swing. Still remember the shade? She asked, surprised. I remember everything about that porch, he said simply. She didn't respond. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, something quieter stirred. As she reached the register, he hesitated. I was sorry to hear about Lila, he said. Maren's throat tightened. She was the best person I ever knew. She always believed you'd come back. Maren gave a soft laugh. She believed in a lot of things. She believed in people. Especially you. His voice was steady. No bitterness. Just truth. She looked at him for a long moment. I left without saying goodbye. I know. Another silence. But this one didn't hurt as much. He handed her the bag of supplies. You want help fixing that railing? I've got time this afternoon. She almost said no, the independent part of her, the woman who'd built her life in skyscrapers and showrooms. But this wasn't Boston. This was Willow Creek. and part of her was tired of doing everything alone. "I'd like that," she said softly. That afternoon, Silas arrived with his toolbox and an easy smile. They worked side by side for hours, sawing, sanding, repairing the railing, and swapping quiet stories of where life had taken them. He told her about running the business, about mentoring 2 local boys at the high school who showed promise with their hands. He didn't boast, just shared. Maren found herself listening differently. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't polished. But he was real, grounded. When they took a break on the porch steps, she asked, "Why didn't you ever leave?" He thought for a moment. Because not everyone's called to chase big cities. Some of us are called to hold the ground steady for when others come back. Her eyes filled unexpectedly. She blinked hard. "You always had a way with words," she said, voice thick. "No," he said gently. "Just a way of seeing what matters." As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard, Silas stood and dusted off his jeans. "Porch is safe now," he said. "Even the swing." Maren smiled. "Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "I'm here, Maren, if you need more than would fill her." She nodded, unable to speak. As he walked down the path, past the willow tree that still stood tall and wide in the backyard, she saw it again, the carved initials, barely visible beneath the bark. S+M. Time hadn't erased them. It had only softened the edges. And maybe that was what this whole trip would do to her. That night, Maren sat on the porch swing. The railing was fixed. The air was cool. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was bracing for something to fall apart. She felt safe. And in the safety, a whisper. Some roots don't need to be torn out. Some need to be remembered. Chapter 3. The Cottage and the Note. By the third morning, Maren had fallen into a rhythm. Coffee by 7, phone checked, but rarely answered, and then several hours of restoring the cottage room by room. It was strange how the peeling wallpaper, creaky floorboards, and stubborn hinges felt less like flaws and more like the pulse of something alive. This house had loved people, held secrets, and survived loss. It wore its age the way a woman wore wisdom, with quiet grace. Today, her goal was the upstairs attic. Aunt Lila had always said, "The attic holds the stories no one was brave enough to throw away." Maren had never believed that until now. She climbed the narrow steps with a flashlight in one hand and a bandana tied around her hair. The door groaned open, dust floating in the golden shafts of light slicing through the old wooden slats. It smelled like cedar, dust, and forgotten time. She spent the morning sorting boxes. Old quilts, stacks of church bulletins, gardening journals from decades ago, shoe boxes labeled in Aunt Lila's neat cursive, baby pictures, 1967 letters, church fundraiser, youth bake sale. Maren smiled. Her aunt had cataloged life with the precision of a historian and the tenderness of a poet. One box stood out. No label, just a faded blue ribbon wrapped loosely around the lid. Inside were dozens of envelopes tied together with string. Yellowed, worn. But on top, tucked beneath the bow, was a single note folded in 4. Maren opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Lila's. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's remembering without holding your fist closed. You cannot heal a wound you won't let air. Let this house help you breathe again. L. Maren stared at the words, unmoving. She hadn't cried when the lawyer called. She hadn't cried at the airport. Not when she unlocked the cottage. Not even when she saw Silas again. But now, holding this note, tears slipped soundlessly down her cheeks. Not because she was sad, but because she had spent so long pretending she wasn't. Later that afternoon, she found herself kneeling by the garden bed near the back porch, hands buried in dry soil. The roses were gone. The mint had overgrown. But the hydrangea, Lila's favorite, had hung on. She clipped away the dead parts, watered gently, and whispered, "We're still here. Both of us." The sound of a car pulling up drew her attention. Silas stepped out, carrying a small brown paper bag. "I figured you probably forgot lunch," he said, holding it up. "Chicken salad from Rosie's. Still your favorite." She blinked. "How do you remember that?" "I told you. I remember the important things." She didn't argue. They ate on the porch, the air still warm but shifting now, a whisper of fall in the breeze. Maren handed him the note without a word. He read it in silence, then folded it carefully and handed it back. She always knew what people needed before they did. Maren nodded. "I thought she was just sentimental. I didn't know she was preparing me." Silas leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. She believed healing happened in layers. Some people think it's a sudden transformation, but Lila always said it was more like peeling back old paint. Painful, slow, but worth the reveal underneath. Maren looked down at her hands, still dirt smudged from the garden. It's exhausting. Being back here, remembering things I tried to forget. You left for a reason, he said gently. She glanced up. Do you hate me for that? No, he said. I never did. Maren's breath hitched. She hadn't expected that. A part of her always assumed he resented her, for leaving, for never writing, for disappearing into the city like she was above all this. I thought you would have moved on, she said. Married. Had kids. Built a different life. I almost did, he said. But something never sat right. Felt like settling instead of building. And you think waiting around here, that's building? He looked at her, patient. I wasn't waiting for you, Maren. I was waiting to be the man I needed to be. For me. This town gave me space to become that. Her chest ached, not from hurt, but recognition. She had chased everything, career, success, approval, trying to earn the version of herself she thought mattered. And yet here was Silas, rooted like the willow tree, not perfect but whole. After he left, Maren stayed on the porch as the light faded. She reread Lila's note. Let this house help you breathe again. Was it possible to start over without losing the person she had become? Could healing mean building on the past, not erasing it? She wandered back upstairs, clutching the box of letters. At the bottom was a photo album she hadn't seen in years. The cover was embossed with pressed wildflowers, now brittle and faded. She opened it and gasped. There, between the pages, was a photo of her and Silas from the summer they turned 17, standing under the willow tree, his arm wrapped around her waist. Her head tipped back in a laugh she hadn't heard in years. On the back, in Lila's handwriting, true things don't die, they wait to be watered. The tears came again, not bitter, not ashamed, just soft, cleansing. That night, she lit one of Lila's old candles, lavender and cedar, and placed the note beside her bed. The house creaked gently around her as she drifted off, the scent wrapping around her like a memory she wasn't afraid of anymore. Outside, the willow tree swayed, steady in the dark. And somewhere deep inside her, something small and buried had begun to bloom. Chapter 4, Sunday at the Diner. The sun rose slow and golden over Willow Creek, gilding the tops of trees and rooftops with a quiet kind of glory. Maren woke to birdsong and the faint rustle of leaves just outside the bedroom window. For once, there were no alarms, no pings from a calendar app demanding her attention. Just peace, strange and unfamiliar, but deeply welcome. She dressed in jeans and a soft cardigan, tied her hair back in a loose braid, and hesitated before leaving the cottage. Her fingers hovered over the small note on the nightstand. Let this house help you breathe again. She tucked it into her coat pocket before stepping outside. Downtown Willow Creek was especially alive on Sunday mornings. The bell of the white-steepled church echoed gently in the distance. Children ran barefoot across the lawn outside. An elderly couple walked arm in arm past the bakery, its windows fogged with the heat of fresh cinnamon rolls. Maren crossed the street toward Rosie's diner, surprised by how little it had changed. Same powder blue booths, same checkerboard tile, and same giant mural of the willow tree painted across the far wall. The place smelled like maple syrup and memories. She'd barely stepped inside before Rosie herself, now older but still sharp-eyed, greeted her with a warm but knowing grin. Well, the prodigal returns. Maren laughed softly. Some things never change. Some things do, Rosie said with a wink. Table by the window? Or booth in the back where you and Silas used to sit and pretend no one could see you holding hands. Maren flushed. Window, please. She was halfway through her coffee when the bell above the door jingled again. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Somehow, her heart had already known. Silas walked in, a worn baseball cap in his hand, and that same quiet steadiness in his steps. He spotted her instantly. Didn't expect to see you here, he said, sliding into the booth opposite her without asking. Rosie bullied me into it. She tends to do that. They smiled. For a moment, the years fell away. They ordered pancakes for her, eggs and black coffee for him, and the conversation settled into something almost comfortable. Maren told him about her life in Boston. The design firm, the long hours, The projects that paid well, but left her hollow. Silas listened carefully, never interrupting, his gaze never straying. When she finished, he didn't offer pity. Just honesty. Sounds like you built something beautiful, even if it wasn't always home. She nodded. That's the thing. I kept building, thinking I'd arrive somewhere that finally felt like enough. But it never did. Maybe enough isn't out there, he said. Maybe it's already in you. She didn't respond. Couldn't. His words were too close to something she wasn't ready to name. Rosie refilled their coffee and handed Maren a small paper bag with a mischievous smile. Something sweet for later. On the house. Maren opened it to find 2 sugar-dusted lemon bars, Lila's favorite. I still make her recipe, Rosie said, voice softer now. It tastes like Sundays. And healing. Maren blinked fast. Thank you. As they stepped outside, Silas nodded toward the church across the street. The last hymn floated out through the open windows. You ever go anymore? He asked. Maren hesitated. Not in a long time. I think I was scared of being seen for who I used to be. Silas nodded. Church isn't about who you were. It's about who you're becoming. They stood in silence for a moment, the town moving gently around them. Kids laughing. Doors opening. Bells ringing. Then Silas turned to her. Want to take a walk before the day disappears? Maren glanced toward the cottage, then back at him. And for reasons she couldn't explain, or maybe didn't need to, she said yes. They walked the winding path behind the town, past the orchard and along the small creek that split the hills. The air smelled of wildflowers and fallen leaves. Their conversation shifted, softened. They spoke of childhood, treehouses and late-night dares, the time they got lost in the woods and found the old swing by the water. Silas slowed as they approached the edge of the lake. You remember what you said the night before you left? He asked. Maren swallowed. I said I had to chase something bigger. He nodded. And I told you that not everything worth having comes from running. I didn't understand that then. You weren't supposed to. Not yet. They stood there, side by side, watching the sunlight dance on the water. No apology. No demand. Just presence. When she returned to the cottage later, the note in her pocket felt heavier. Not like a burden, but like a seed pressing toward the surface. She unfolded it and placed it on the kitchen windowsill, beside a blooming jar of wildflowers. Let this house help you breathe again. It was working, and so was he. Chapter 5. The storm that changed everything. The air was different by midweek. It hung thick, heavy with tension that Maren couldn't quite name. The skies had shifted, not yet dark, but smeared with the warning hues of gray and olive. Even the birds had quieted, their usual morning song replaced by an uneasy stillness. Inside the cottage, Maren stood by the kitchen sink rinsing blueberries for a pie she wasn't sure she'd finish. She stared out the window at the sky, feeling an old familiar tightness coil in her chest, the kind that crept in before something broke. She glanced toward the willow tree. Its branches swayed, not with their usual grace, but with a kind of anxious twitch. Something was coming. By late afternoon, the weather had turned. The wind rolled in, slow but deliberate, bending trees and slamming shutters with no apology. Maren moved quickly through the house, latching windows, securing loose boards on the porch, and checking for flashlights and candles. Her phone buzzed. Silas, you good over there? She smiled despite the tension. Maren, holding down the fort. You? Silas. Looks like this one might hit harder than expected. You want company? Maren hesitated, then typed. I do. 20 minutes later, Silas arrived soaked from the waist down, rain streaking down his face, his hair plastered to his forehead. You didn't have to run through a hurricane, she joked, opening the door wider. He stepped in, shook off the rain, and grinned. Didn't want to miss the opportunity to eat panic pie. She blinked. You remembered the blueberry pie tradition? Of course. It was always your coping mechanism. Maren handed him a towel. Some things never change. The wind howled through the trees, bending the willow until its branches scraped the windows. Thunder cracked overhead, and for a moment, the lights flickered. Silas glanced around. Got a generator? Maren opened the pantry and pulled out a small battery-powered lantern. We have light. And pie. We'll survive. They set up in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with their plates. The candlelight cast soft golden shadows across the walls, warming the edges of the storm. Silas took a bite and let out a long, appreciative sigh. Still the best pie I've ever had. Maren shook her head. You've clearly lived a very sheltered culinary life. He pointed at her with his fork. Or maybe you just underestimate yourself. Her smile faded slightly, replaced by something deeper. I used to think the only way to matter was to make it big. Big city, big job, big life, she said. But lately, I've started wondering if maybe I was wrong. He set his plate down. It's okay to redefine success. You can be both, bold and rooted. She looked at him, really looked. Is that what you are? Rooted? He nodded once. I used to think staying meant I was playing small. But now I think it takes just as much courage to stay as it does to leave. The wind roared again, louder this time. A heavy thud echoed from the backyard. Maren stood quickly. That was the willow. They rushed to the back door and peered through the glass. A large branch had snapped and fallen across the garden bed. Not the whole tree, but enough to scatter leaves and stir up soil. Maren's heart sank. Lila planted her best hydrangeas there. Silas placed a hand on her shoulder. They'll come back. Sometimes a storm clears space for stronger roots. Later, as the storm settled into steady rain, they sat wrapped in blankets on the couch, the soft hum of silence between them. Maren reached into the side table drawer and pulled out a notebook. Lila's journal. She hadn't meant to read it in front of anyone. But tonight, with thunder echoing and the past laid bare in so many ways, it felt right. She opened to a random page. The strongest trees bend in storms, not because they're weak, but because they know how to survive. Maren will understand this one day. I just hope I'm still around when she does. Maren closed the journal, her voice thick. She always believed in me more than I did. Silas didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The rain softened outside. The wind calmed. And for the first time since returning to Willow Creek, Maren didn't feel like she was passing through. She felt placed. Not lost. Not stuck. Planted. Chapter 6. What the Garden Remembers. The storm had passed. By morning, Willow Creek breathed again, slowly, as if stretching after a long, uneasy sleep. The sky was pale blue, washed clean. Puddles glimmered in the driveway, and the wind had stilled to a whisper. The world looked different, softened somehow. Hushed. Maren stood barefoot on the back porch, arms wrapped around her middle. Her gaze fell on the garden. The willow tree was still standing, one less branch now, but still whole. Still beautiful. The hydrangea bed, though battered, wasn't ruined. Some blossoms had been crushed, yes. But nestled between the bent stems, she saw something small, new buds, already lifting toward the sun. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Behind her, Silas emerged, coffee mug in hand. He handed her one without speaking, then stood beside her in the quiet. They're not gone, she said, eyes still on the hydrangeas. Nope, he replied. Just making room. They spent the morning cleaning up fallen limbs, raking scattered leaves, and reinforcing loose porch slats. Maren tied her hair up and pulled on gloves, the work grounding her more than she expected. Each sweep of the rake, each lifted branch, felt like reclaiming something. At one point, she paused, hand on her hip, and looked around. You know, this place is actually starting to look cared for again. Silas, bent over the garden bed, gave her a mock serious nod. Don't let it go to your head. You've still got half a fence falling over and a front step that squeaks like a horror movie. She laughed, an unguarded, honest sound. It surprised them both. Later, while Silas repaired the fence, Maren wandered toward the back corner of the yard where a small bench sat under the tree, half hidden by overgrowth. She cleared the vines and sat down slowly. Years ago, she and Lila would sit here every summer evening. Lila would hum hymns or tell stories about the people of Willow Creek. Some true, some slightly exaggerated for charm. Maren closed her eyes. She could almost hear her aunt's voice again. Warm, wise. Safe. People think faith is loud, Lila once said. But the strongest faith I ever saw whispered in gardens, not shouted from pulpits. Maren hadn't understood then, but she did now. As the day wore on, Silas prepared to leave. You've got this from here, he said, glancing at the now-raked yard. I do, Maren replied, brushing her hands on her jeans. Thank you. He looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. Hey, can I ask you something? She nodded. Are you planning to stay? I mean, not just for the repairs. For real. Maren hesitated. I don't know yet, she admitted. This place, it pulls on something I'd forgotten. But I don't know if I belong here anymore. Silas nodded slowly. Sometimes it's not about belonging. It's about becoming. She blinked. You always talk like a poet. When did that happen? He smiled. Must have been all that time alone with tools and old wood. That night, alone in the cottage, Maren returned to the attic. She brought down more boxes, photo albums, hand-sewn quilts, and one that made her pause. Inside were drawings she'd made as a teenager. Fashion sketches, ideas for stage sets and boutique interiors. There were notes scribbled in the margins. Aunt Lila says my imagination is too big for this town. What if I made something beautiful that didn't have to be loud? Design is storytelling. She hadn't seen these in years. And yet, the girl who drew them still lived somewhere inside her. Not lost, just buried under pressure and performance. She traced the edges of one sketch with her finger. What if I stopped running from her? Before bed, Maren lit the candle again. Lavender and cedar. She placed one of her childhood sketches on the nightstand beside Lila's note. Outside, the garden rustled softly. And inside, for the first time, she felt something shift. Not brokenness, not grief. Hope. Rooted, steady, alive. Chapter 7. The Letter in the Floorboards. The next morning began like a whisper. Maren woke before the sun fully rose. The cottage still bathed in that soft, bluish-gray hue that made the world feel hushed and sacred. She didn't reach for her phone, didn't check emails. Instead, she wrapped herself in a knit sweater, padded barefoot across the wood floor, and brewed coffee the old-fashioned way, slow and intentional. The cottage had a strange way of slowing time. Or maybe it was simply returning her to a rhythm she was never meant to leave behind. She carried her mug to the old reading nook under the staircase. The built-in bench was worn and sunken in the middle, but still held a cozy sort of charm. As she leaned back, her elbow tapped against something rough on the wooden panel behind the cushion. Frowning, she pulled the cushion aside. There, barely visible in the dim morning light, was a small, splintered gap in the floorboard. Curious, Maren retrieved a screwdriver from the nearby drawer and gently pried it open. Inside, buried in dust and decades, was a folded envelope. It had her name on it, in Aunt Lila's delicate, looping script. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. The ink had faded slightly, but the message was clear. My dearest Maren, if you're reading this, I imagine the house has started to speak to you again. I always believe that old places know things we bury, things we hide from even ourselves. I left this letter here because I know you, sweetheart. You would come back, but only if something inside you broke a little. I wish I could have been here when that happened, but I trust the house to catch you, just like it did me. You spent so long trying to escape the quiet, but you forgot that the quiet is where you hear God best. I hope by now you've remembered the girl who loved sketchbooks more than spreadsheets, who believed in meaning over noise. There's no shame in ambition, but don't lose your soul chasing things that won't hold you when the storm hits. This house will not heal you, but it will hold you while you heal. That's what home is. And if by some miracle you're not alone right now, if that boy with the kind eyes came back around, be kind to him. He never stopped loving you. With all my heart. Lila. Maren sat there in stunned silence. It was like Lila had looked straight through time and known every fracture, every defense, every fear. She pressed the letter to her chest, breath catching. A tear slipped free, then another. Not because of the pain, but because of the grace. The kind of grace that doesn't demand you fix everything. It just asks you to stay. Later that morning, Maren found herself pacing the kitchen, then the hallway, then back again. The weight of Lila's letter stirred something that wouldn't settle. She needed to talk to someone. Without overthinking, she grabbed her keys and headed out. Silas was outside his workshop when she pulled into the drive. He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag, eyebrows lifting in surprise. You okay? He asked. Maren walked straight up to him, pulled the letter from her coat pocket, and handed it over. He read it slowly, word by word. When he looked up, there was something wet in his eyes, though he blinked it away. She always did know how to speak to the soul, he said. Maren nodded. I think I've been so afraid of making the wrong decision. I forgot that not choosing is its own kind of decision. Silas leaned against the workbench. And what are you choosing now? She hesitated, then said quietly, to stay. At least for now. To listen. To stop running. His gaze softened. That's enough. More than enough. They walked together along the edge of the property line where the land sloped gently toward the creek. The air was crisp, touched by early autumn. As they passed the old orchard, Maren stopped. She said, I think I want to turn the back room into a studio. Start sketching again. Maybe even design a few things for the local shop. Silas grinned. Now that's the Marin I remember. She laughed. Maybe it's the Marin I forgot. They stood there for a while, no need for more words. The wind carried the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke. It was quiet. Wholly even. That night, Marin placed Lila's letter in a frame and set it on the mantel. It didn't solve everything. Didn't erase the ache or rewrite the past. But it grounded her. And in the space beneath the willow tree, something long dormant had stirred awake. Not just hope, belief. Chapter 8. The Studio and the Sketchpad. The back room of the cottage had always been a bit of a mystery. When Marin was a girl, Aunt Lila had kept it locked, saying it was a room for later, which had only fueled her curiosity. After Lila passed, Marin had opened it once, glanced inside at the cluttered mess of boxes and broken furniture, and closed it again. She wasn't ready then. But now, something was different. She stood in the doorway, coffee mug in one hand, surveying the forgotten space like an architect considering the bones of a building. Dust motes danced in the sunlight filtering through the tall, narrow windows. The floors were scuffed, but solid. The walls, faded with time, still bore the faintest blush of pale rose paint. It would be perfect, not because it was ready, but because she was. She began the way Lila would have, by moving everything out with care. Each box felt like a time capsule. Books on herbal remedies, old sewing patterns, church choir sheet music. In the corner, under a tarp, she found a wooden easel covered in cobwebs. She laughed softly. Aunt Lila had tried painting once. Too abstract, she'd said. I paint better with flowers. When the room was finally clear, Marin opened the windows wide and let the cool autumn air roll through. Then she began to clean. Scrubbing, sweeping, sanding. The work was honest, grounding. Every swipe of her hand removed not just grime, but fear. Every hour spent in that room felt like a silent pact. I'm here. I'm trying. By late afternoon, the room had transformed. Bare, but bright. Alive. Marin pulled out her sketch pad, the one she'd found in the attic, still full of her teenage dreams, and laid it gently on the small writing desk by the window. She opened to a blank page and stared. The pencil hovered above the paper like a prayer. Then, slowly, almost reverently, she began to draw. Not for a client, not for approval, but for herself. A soft knock interrupted her flow. She looked up to see Silas at the doorframe, holding a to-go cup and a crooked smile. I figured you'd forget lunch again, he said. I didn't, she replied, standing to stretch. I just postponed it in favor of emotional progress. He held up the cup. Emotional progress pairs well with hazelnut coffee. She accepted it gratefully. You're dangerously good at remembering things. I'm a carpenter. Details are my currency. They sat on the porch steps, sipping in comfortable silence. The wind had picked up just enough to rustle the dry leaves at their feet. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime sang a soft, lonely song. After a few minutes, Marin asked, Do you ever regret staying? Silas didn't answer right away. Sometimes, when the world feels too small, when I wonder what else I could have seen. But mostly no. I think I've lived a life that meant something. Marin looked down at her coffee. I want that. Not just a career. A life. One that means something. He turned to her. Then start here. Build something that reflects you, not what you think people want. She glanced back at the studio window. The sketchpad glowed in the light, like a beacon. That evening, she drew until her hand ached. By the end of it, the page was filled with something that surprised her. Not a house or a boutique or a runway design, but a garden. My dearest Marin, if you're reading this, I imagine the house has started to speak to you again. I always believe that old places know things we bury, things we hide from even ourselves. I left this letter here because I know you, sweetheart. You would come back, but only if something inside you broke a little. I wish I could have been here when that happened, but I trust the house to catch you, just like it did me. You spent so long trying to escape the quiet, but you forgot that the quiet is where you hear God best. I hope by now you've remembered the girl who loved sketchbooks more than spreadsheets, who believed in meaning over noise. There's no shame in ambition, but don't lose your soul chasing things that won't hold you when the storm hits. This house will not heal you, but it will hold you while you heal. That's what home is. And if by some miracle you're not alone right now, If that boy with the kind eyes came back around, be kind to him. He never stopped loving you. With all my heart. Lila. Marin sat there in stunned silence. It was like Lila had looked straight through time and known every fracture, every defense, every fear. She pressed the letter to her chest, breath catching. A tear slipped free, then another. Not because of the pain, but because of the grace. The kind of grace that doesn't demand you fix everything. It just asks you to stay. Later that morning, Marin found herself pacing the kitchen, then the hallway, then back again. The weight of Lila's letter stirred something that wouldn't settle. She needed to talk to someone. Without overthinking, she grabbed her keys and headed out. Silas was outside his workshop when she pulled into the drive. He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag, eyebrows lifting in surprise. "You okay?" he asked. Marin walked straight up to him, pulled the letter from her coat pocket, and handed it over. He read it slowly, word by word. When he looked up, there was something wet in his eyes, though he blinked it away. "She always did know how to speak to the soul," he said. Marin nodded. "I think I've been so afraid of making the wrong decision. I forgot that not choosing is its own kind of decision." Silas leaned against the workbench. "And what are you choosing now?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "To stay. At least for now. To listen. To stop running." His gaze softened. "That's enough. More than enough." They walked together along the edge of the property line where the land sloped gently toward the creek. The air was crisp, touched by early autumn. As they passed the old orchard, Marin stopped. "You know," she said, "I think I want to turn the back room into a studio. Start sketching again. Maybe even design a few things for the local shop." Silas grinned. "Now that's the Marin I remember." She laughed. "Maybe it's the Marin I forgot." They stood there for a while, no need for more words. The wind carried the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke. It was quiet. Wholly even. That night, Marin placed Lila's letter in a frame and set it on the mantel. It didn't solve everything. Didn't erase the ache or rewrite the past. But it grounded her. And in the space beneath the willow tree, something long dormant had stirred awake. Not just hope. Belief. Chapter 8. The Studio and the Sketchpad. The back room of the cottage had always been a bit of a mystery. When Marin was a girl, Aunt Lila had kept it locked, saying it was a room for later, which had only fueled her curiosity. After Lila passed, Marin had opened it once, glanced inside at the cluttered mess of boxes and broken furniture, and closed it again. She wasn't ready then. But now, something was different. She stood in the doorway, coffee mug in one hand, surveying the forgotten space like an architect considering the bones of a building. Dust motes danced in the sunlight filtering through the tall, narrow windows. The floors were scuffed, but solid. The walls, faded with time, still bore the faintest blush of pale rose paint. It would be perfect, not because it was ready, but because she was. She began the way Lila would have, by moving everything out with care. Each box felt like a time capsule. Books on herbal remedies, old sewing patterns, church choir sheet music. In the corner, under a tarp, she found a wooden easel covered in cobwebs. She laughed softly. Aunt Lila had tried painting once. "Too abstract," she'd said. "I paint better with flowers." When the room was finally clear, Marin opened the windows wide and let the cool autumn air roll through. Then she began to clean. Scrubbing, sweeping, sanding. The work was honest, grounding. Every swipe of her hand removed not just grime, but fear. Every hour spent in that room felt like a silent pact. "I'm here. I'm trying." By late afternoon, the room had transformed. Bare but bright. Alive. Marin pulled out her sketch pad, the one she'd found in the attic, still full of her teenage dreams, and laid it gently on the small writing desk by the window. She opened to a blank page and stared. The pencil hovered above the paper like a prayer. Then, slowly, almost reverently, she began to draw. Not for a client, not for approval, but for herself. A soft knock interrupted her flow. She looked up to see Silas at the doorframe, holding a to-go cup and a crooked smile. "I figured you'd forget lunch again," he said. "I didn't," she replied, standing to stretch. "I just postponed it in favor of emotional progress." He held up the cup. Emotional progress pairs well with hazelnut coffee. She accepted it gratefully. "You're dangerously good at remembering things." "I'm a carpenter. Details are my currency." They sat on the porch steps, sipping in comfortable silence. The wind had picked up just enough to rustle the dry leaves at their feet. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime sang a soft, lonely song. After a few minutes, Maren asked, "Do you ever regret staying?" Silas didn't answer right away. "Sometimes, when the world feels too small. When I wonder what else I could have seen. But mostly no. I think I've lived a life that meant something." Maren looked down at her coffee. "I want that. Not just a career. A life. One that means something." He turned to her. "Then start here. Build something that reflects you, not what you think people want." She glanced back at the studio window. The sketchpad glowed in the light, like a beacon. That evening, she drew until her hand ached. By the end of it, the page was filled with something that surprised her. Not a house or a boutique or a runway design, but a garden, full of wildflowers and hidden nooks. A path winding through a grove. A small bench beneath a tree that looked suspiciously like the willow in the backyard. And at the center of it all, a little cottage with light pouring from its windows. Home. She labeled the page carefully. "The life I want to build." Then she closed the book and whispered aloud, "Thank you, Lila, for waiting." Because somewhere between the silence and the sketchpad, she'd realized. She hadn't just come home to remember. She'd come home to begin. Chapter 9. The Town Fair. The scent of kettle corn and apple cider drifted through the center of Willow Creek like a hymn from childhood. Familiar, sweet, and deeply comforting. The annual harvest fair had always been the town's way of celebrating survival, of summer's end, of another fruitful year, of each other. And this year, for the first time in what felt like forever, Maren was part of it again. Not as a visitor breezing in for a weekend, but as someone rooted enough to help hang bunting and haul hay bales without needing to explain why she came back. She stood by the main booth with a tray of handmade flyers, watching as families strolled past in scarves and flannels. Kids darted between pumpkin stands and caramel apple vendors. Couples lingered under string lights. The whole town felt like a page from one of Lila's old journals, simple, warm, and stitched together by 1,000 unseen threads of memory. "Big turnout," Silas said, appearing beside her with a hot cider in each hand. Even Mr. Holloway brought his harmonica, which I think violates 2 noise ordinances and at least 1 law of music. Maren laughed, accepting the cup. "It's perfect. You sound surprised." "I am. I didn't think something so ordinary could feel this good." Silas studied her a moment, the way one reads a weathered map. Sometimes ordinary is the miracle. Their booth sat between the Quilting Guild and the Book Exchange. Maren's display was small but meaningful, a hand-lettered sign that read, "Homegrown Designs. Art for Everyday Living." A sketchbook with open pages for browsing, and a few framed prints she'd brought from her attic project. People wandered by, pausing to study the pieces, a watercolor of the Willow Tree, a reimagined layout for the town square, even a whimsical illustration of Rosie's diner with sparkles in the pie crust. Mrs. Bell, the librarian, leaned in close. "This one made me cry. It's the way I remember the diner before my Harold passed." Maren smiled softly. "Thank you. That means more than you know." A little girl tugged at her sleeve next. "Did you really draw these?" "I did." The girl's eyes widened. "I want to draw my dog like that someday." "Then you will," Maren said, kneeling to her level. "Promise me you won't stop drawing, even if it feels scary." The girl nodded solemnly. "Okay." As the sun dipped lower, the fair lights blinked on, casting a golden glow over everything. A band began to play slow country waltzes near the gazebo, and someone lit a bonfire in the center field. Maren wandered toward it, letting the warmth soak into her. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed this. Not the fair itself, but the reminder that life could feel whole without needing to be dramatic. She turned to find Silas beside her again. "Can I show you something?" he asked. She followed him through a narrow path behind the main tents until they reached a quiet edge of the fairground where lanterns swayed in the trees. There, tucked between 2 old oaks, was a wooden bench facing the creek. "Built this a few months after you left," he said, brushing off a seat. Didn't know why at the time. Just felt like it needed to exist. Maren sat, breath catching as the water shimmered in the moonlight. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I think I was waiting for someone to sit on it with," he said, almost to himself. They sat in silence for a while. Not the awkward kind, the sacred kind. Then Maren spoke. "I didn't know I could still fit here." "You never stopped," he said gently. "You just forgot." As the town celebrated around them, Maren closed her eyes, breathed in the night, and let the stillness settle deep into her bones. Not everything needed to be fixed. Some things just needed to be felt. And right now, in the glow of lanterns, in the weight of belonging, in the presence of someone who never asked her to be anything more than she was, she felt whole. Chapter 10. The Out-of-Town Offer. The email arrived on a Monday. Maren was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by sketchbooks and coffee mugs in various states of emptiness, when her laptop chimed. She clicked absent-mindedly, expecting a newsletter or maybe a note from one of the local vendors. Instead, it was from Vivian Crane, Senior Creative Director at House Atelier, one of the most sought-after design firms on the West Coast. Subject: Design Director Opportunity. Our phone call 2 months ago. Maren blinked. She hadn't thought about that conversation in weeks, a casual catch-up call with an old college friend turned recruiter. At the time, she'd brushed it off as polite networking. But this was an official offer. A full-time position, high salary, relocation support, access to high-profile clients and luxury projects. A dream offer. Or it used to be. She sat very still, reading every word 3 times. Her heart began to thud, not with excitement, but with something tighter, a kind of pressure in her chest that made it hard to breathe. Because 2 months ago, she would have screamed at this chance. Now, she wasn't sure. Maren stepped outside, needing air. The willow tree swayed gently in the breeze, casting a dappled dance of sunlight across the garden. The scent of earth and drying leaves filled her lungs. She found herself walking without thinking, past the picket fence, through the field, and down the path to Silas's workshop. He was inside, sanding the edge of a cabinet door, sawdust clinging to his forearms. When he looked up and saw her, his smile faltered just a bit. "You okay?" "I got a job offer," she said, holding up her phone. "From House Atelier, out in Seattle." His eyebrows lifted, but he said nothing at first, just set the sander down and wiped his hands slowly. "That's big," he said finally. "Yeah. You going to take it?" Maren looked at the screen again, then at him. "I don't know. It used to be all I ever wanted. It's everything I worked for. But I've changed. Or maybe I'm remembering who I was before the world told me who I should be." Silas nodded slowly. "So what's it really offering you? The job or the escape?" She didn't answer. Not right away, because she didn't know. That evening, she sat by the fireplace with Aunt Lila's framed letter on her lap. "Don't lose your soul chasing things that won't hold you when the storm hits." She read that line over and over. It was never about success. It was about substance. And while she was finally remembering how to create from her soul, she couldn't ignore the small, persistent whisper inside, the one asking, "But what if this opportunity was given to you for a reason? Could she still serve her calling somewhere else?" Was her growth in Willow Creek just the beginning, or the entire story? The next day, Maren asked Rosie if she could borrow the diner's back booth for an hour. She brought her sketchpad, some old design concepts, and the email. And she wrote a pros and cons list, then a vision map, then a few pages of raw, unfiltered journaling that left her blinking back tears. It wasn't about fear of leaving. It was about value. What kind of life did she want to build? Where could she build it? And most of all, who was she becoming? That night, she returned home and opened her laptop. She drafted a reply to Vivian. Her hands trembled, not because of fear, but because of clarity and peace. Whatever she chose would not be running away. It would be choosing intention. And as her fingers hovered over the send button, she whispered a quiet prayer, not for a sign, but for strength, to honor who she had been and who she was becoming. Chapter 11. What We Keep. 2 days passed. Maren didn't send the email, not because she'd made her decision, but because she was giving it space. She'd lived enough years rushing toward whatever looked impressive. This time, she needed silence to help her hear her own heart. She started her morning in the studio. The once-forgotten room had become sacred to her, not because of the light or the freshly painted walls, but because she had built it with her bare hands. It held proof that she was capable of creating something good, even when the blueprint wasn't clear. She pulled her sketchpad onto her lap and flipped through it slowly. There were pages filled with hope, pages of fear, pages where her old life and new one collided, blueprints of boutiques beside drawings of willow trees and hand-lettered quotes. On the final page, she had sketched the garden again. Only this time, She added a second bench, one facing hers. Later that afternoon, she walked into town with a paper bag under her arm. A gift. Rosie looked up from the counter as Marin entered the diner. "You've got the look of a woman who just made peace with herself," she said, pouring coffee without asking. Marin laughed. "I might have." She placed the bag on the counter and slid it toward her. "Open it." Inside was a framed watercolor. The diner, glowing in twilight, with a warm haze in every window and little hearts drawn into the frosting of the pies in the display case. Rosie blinked rapidly. "Well, shoot. I guess I can't yell at you for not painting my place anymore." "I figured if I'm staying," Marin said softly, "I should start giving pieces of myself to the people who raised me." Rosie came around the counter and hugged her so tightly Marin nearly spilled the coffee. The next stop was the church, not because she needed answers, but because she needed stillness. The sanctuary was empty. Sunlight fell in long ribbons across the pews. Marin slipped into the second row and sat in silence, hands clasped in her lap. "I don't know if you're waiting for me to pick," she whispered aloud, "but I want you to know I'm not choosing out of fear this time. I'm choosing to be faithful to the person you made me." She didn't hear a voice, no lightning bolts, but peace washed over her like a warm breeze. She knew what to do. That night, she walked down to the creek and found Silas by the bench he'd built. He looked up as she approached, his expression calm, expectant. "I'm staying," she said, no hesitation in her voice. A breath left him slowly, like he'd been holding it all along. "I hoped you would, but I needed it to be your choice." "It is." She sat beside him, their shoulders brushed. "I'm not staying because I'm afraid," she added, "or because I failed in the city. I'm staying because I finally understand that legacy isn't about what you build out there. It's about what you carry in here." She pressed a hand to her heart. "And who you give it to." He nodded. "That sounds a lot like Lila. She taught me without ever needing to be in the room." They sat in silence for a while, not because there was nothing left to say, but because some moments are so full, so sacred, that speaking would only break their holiness. Marin glanced up at the stars, and for the first time in years, she wasn't chasing anything. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Chapter 12, When the Light Comes In. The morning of the harvest Sunday began with rain. Not the stormy kind, the kind that falls softly, like a benediction. It tapped gently on the roof of the cottage and streamed down the windows in thin, silver trails. Marin stood at the kitchen sink, watching the world soften beneath its touch. It was her favorite kind of morning. Quiet, reflective, whole. She took her coffee into the studio and sat at the desk. A new page waited in her sketchbook, blank and open. She didn't rush. She simply let the pencil move. Arcs, lines, fragments of scenes she couldn't yet name. Somewhere between memory and vision, the image came together. A house filled with light, vines climbing up the side, children laughing in the background, and two pairs of boots by the door. Not a picture of where she was. A picture of what was to come. Later, dressed in a navy cardigan and boots still damp from the walk, Marin made her way to the chapel. The town gathered slowly. Umbrellas closing, raincoats dripping, laughter echoing as people greeted one another like family. The smell of cider and cinnamon clung to the air. In the back pew, she spotted Rosie, Mr. Holloway, the quilting ladies, the town librarian, and even the mayor's grumpy husband, who hadn't attended church in 3 years. Everyone was here. Because this place meant something. Because it held them together. Pastor Gene stepped to the pulpit and smiled. "Today's not about sermons," he said. "Today's about stories." He gestured toward a small stage that had been set beside the altar, and one by one, townsfolk came forward to share. A woman whose husband had come through a cancer scare. A teenager who'd overcome anxiety enough to perform in the school play. A widower who'd found new meaning in planting trees by the river. Marin listened with her hand over her heart. None of the stories were polished. None of them had perfect endings. But each of them rang with truth, with redemption, with the kind of light that gets in through the cracks. At the end of the service, Pastor Gene asked if anyone else felt led to speak. Marin's hand rose before she could stop it. She walked slowly to the front, not entirely sure what she was going to say. Her boots clicked softly on the wood floor as the room hushed. She turned to face them, the town she'd once left, the people she'd thought she'd outgrown. "I used to think purpose meant chasing big dreams in big cities," she began. "And I don't regret trying. But I lost something in the process, not just time or peace. I lost myself. She took a breath. The silence wrapped around her like a shawl. This house, this town, reminded me that sometimes the life you're looking for isn't waiting on the horizon. Sometimes it's rooted right where you started, just waiting for you to come home. A pause. And I'm home now. There were quiet nods and a few sniffles. She smiled, soft but sure. Thank you for holding space for me to remember who I am. That afternoon, the sun broke through. The clouds pulled back like curtains, and golden light spilled over Willow Creek as if God had flung it from his own hands. Children ran barefoot through puddles. Families lingered by the gazebo, music rising again from the bandstand. Marin walked back to the cottage, the path familiar now. Inside, she placed her sketchpad on the mantel, beside Lila's letter. The last page still open. The home she wanted to build, with light in every window. She traced it with her fingers, smiling. She didn't have all the answers, but she had a beginning. And in that sacred, quiet space beneath the willow tree, that was enough. Headphone final life lesson. Dear family, sometimes the loudest voices in the world tell us that success is somewhere out there. In the cities we haven't reached, the titles we haven't earned, or the lives that look better on paper. But the truth? Success isn't always about chasing more. It's about discovering what matters most. Like peace. Like purpose. Like the people who see us for who we are and love us still. Marin didn't fail when she left the city. She found herself when she came home. So if you're listening to this and wondering if you've missed your chance, or if the life you truly want is slipping through your fingers, remember. Sometimes, the place you belong isn't new. It's remembered, and it's been waiting for you all along. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Ever After Audiobooks for more faith-uplifting, emotionally rich stories like this one. Your support helps us continue creating stories that matter, stories with meaning, with hope, and with heart. We're building something special here, and we're so glad you're part of it.